Hey, this is Todd Stacy, and welcome to In the Weeds with Alabama Daily News. Today we're talking with Steven Reed, the mayor of Montgomery. It was 1 year ago that Reed was elected mayor of Montgomery. That was an historic moment in which it really gained a lot of national attention because Montgomery, a city known for its civil rights history, known as the cradle of the Confederacy and the birthplace of the civil rights movement, elected its first black mayor. It was a major moment, but the celebration didn't last long because a few short months after Reed's election, he was confronting really several major challenges all at once. He had a fight with the legislature over the occupational tax. The city had planned an occupational tax, and the legislature, and specifically led at least by lawmakers from surrounding cities, passed a bill that limited cities' capacity to enact such taxes. It was a big deal. It's probably going to go into the courts. But that was a huge fight right out the gate and a big deal for Mayor Reed. Of course, you had the coronavirus pandemic. At one point, I think it was mid-May, Montgomery was listed nationally as a hotspot, which obviously no mayor wants to have that headline. So, and it was actually, that's early on in the pandemic. So earlier, maybe than some areas were dealing with the worst part of the pandemic, Montgomery was, and Mayor Reed was, so that was a huge challenge. And of course, you have the racial unrest, the calls for police reforms that came after the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota. In Montgomery, we had, several demonstrations, protests. There was one, I remember one pretty big march downtown, but you never saw any violence. Other cities, unfortunately, saw violence, destruction of property, things like that. You never saw that in Montgomery, but that was still a very big challenge. And of course, police reform as well. He's expected to institute some police reforms. He's got some things listed out in terms of what he wants to do, but another big challenge. So it's just interesting to me that here in this very short year, Steven Reed has been confronted with a lot of major challenges all at once. But now, with less than a week to go before the election, he is maybe confronting his biggest challenge yet, and that is trying to convince Montgomery County voters, to raise their own property taxes to pay for improving the long-troubled Montgomery Public School system. There's a referendum on the ballot that would raise Montgomery's education property tax mills from 10 to 22. 10 is actually the lowest the state will allow local property taxes to be. I'll get into that more in a minute. It's interesting, though, because technically, as mayor, Reed doesn't have any authority over the public schools. That's a county thing. It's the Montgomery County Board of Education governs the schools, along with the superintendent, which they hire. So the mayor, the city actually plays no role there. But nonetheless, Reed has been the biggest cheerleader for this property tax increase, calling it essential to improve the schools, be able to retain and recruit more businesses into the city, and even to keep Maxwell Air Force Base from relocating. That's actually been a huge deal they've talked about lately. They had a press conference, I guess, last week about it. And the way that works is that every so often, the military will have what's called a BRAC, a Base Realignment and Closure Commission. And that process is how Congress and the military go about choosing which bases stay open, which ones close, which ones need to be built. We haven't actually had one since about 2005, which is good news if you don't want to lose your base. But for the military, they really need a reassessment of their forces. I mean, think about what we were doing in 2005 in terms of the wars we were fighting, the threats facing the nation, and what is happening now. It's totally different. And so the military has to respond to that. We've gone through BRACs in the past that have been painful. Mobile had an Air Force base to close, Brooklyn Air Force Base in Mobile. Anniston had Fort McClellan close. And it's a painful process. I mean, if you've got a military base that's so much a part of your community, not just culturally, but economically, it can really hurt things. So Montgomery obviously doesn't want to lose Maxwell Air Force Base, but the troubled schools aren't helping because, as the military assesses these things and ranks the various, factors that go into locating or relocating, military support or support for military families is a factor, and education is a key factor in assessing how much a community supports its military families. I mean, it's right up there with hospitals in terms of, are the offerings locally going to help our military families live a good quality of life? And that's a real problem. Montgomery schools rank really low in that, and so people are concerned. Another problem facing Maxwell and Montgomery is, if you look at the mission at Maxwell, the main one is education. It's the intellectual center of the Air Force. That means Air University, officer training schools. That's what they do at Maxwell. And so it's unlike other bases or posts where there's a lot of infrastructure in terms of equipment and, that would maybe be difficult to relocate, or maybe it's based regionally for weather or climate. You can have a school almost anywhere. And so that concerns people, because if you were going to just kind of rank bases on how easy it would be to relocate, Maxwell would technically be pretty easy to relocate. But this is a base that goes, really its roots are in the Wright brothers. It predates the Air Force. It goes back to the Army Air Corps days. So it would be a real loss for the city of Montgomery and the state of Alabama for Maxwell to be relocated in the next round of BRAC, which could come soon. That's something that Reed has been harping on. You'll hear him talk about this in our interview in just a few minutes. So here are the basics of what this tax plan does. In Alabama, local schools are largely funded off of property taxes, and that is assessed through mills, which basically means 1,000th. And so if the mill is $1, or if you have one mill, that means you're charging $1 for every $1,000. In Montgomery's case, Montgomery has a 10 mil education property tax. So that means they charge $10 for every $1,000 worth of assessed property value. So, and that's just the simple math. If your house is worth $100,000, then based on the calculations, you would pay $10 a month in education property tax. If you had a house worth $200,000, then you would pay $20 a month in education property tax. Now that's just the education portion of the tax. That's important. The county also assesses property tax for other revenue streams, but for the purposes of this referendum, it is only being assessed on the education portion of the property tax. So they want to raise it to 22. So that $100,000 house, instead of paying $10 a month, you start paying $22 a month. And that $200,000 house, instead of paying $20 a month, you start paying $44 a month. And again, those are simple math calculations. There are other portions of the tax. I don't want anybody to think that people are only paying $10 a month in property taxes. They pay a lot more, but that's just the education portion of the tax. So Reed and other advocates say that if it passes, it's going to raise $33 million every year to put toward education. They want to do several things with this money. They want to float a bond, a $250 million bond issue that will pay for maintenance or deferred maintenance and new construction costs. They say they have more than $200 million worth of deferred maintenance. So, we would just be getting caught up with some of that. But also hiring more teachers, hiring more security guards, hiring more counselors, specifically on teachers, AP, arts, career tech. That's what the county has said they want to do with this extra money. So, that's just a brief explanation of what's on the ballot this November. And it's for all Montgomery County voters except those that live in Pike Road. Pike Road has its own school system and will not vote on this property tax. As with anything like this, there's always loyal opposition, and this time that opposition is being organized by John Pudner and his Take Back Our Republic group. Anybody that's been around Alabama politics for very long knows the name John Pudner. He's kind of famous for his grassroots campaigning. He made a real name for himself when he organized or kind of led the opposition to Bob Riley's Amendment 1 tax reform plan. That was back in 2003. More recently, he also organized the opposition to Governor Kay Ivey's school board reorganization that also failed. So, I mean, I don't have enough time to list all the things he's worked on, but he's a smart guy, successful guy, and so he's organizing opposition to this. Their arguments are that the school board can't be trusted, hasn't had enough reforms to justify more tax dollars being given to them. And he also argues that the process by which this was passed through the legislature was too fast with no public input, and that's generally a bad thing. So there is opposition out there, and you can see some of the signs. It's just very simple. Vote no on new taxes, which, look, that's a really simple message that it's easy to sell a lot of times. Nobody likes taxes. Reed's job is harder, and he's got advocates. He's got a coalition around him, business community, faith community, and the military community. And so he's confident. He says, look, the same coalition of voters that sent him into office are going to rally around this because they know the needs are great, and they're talking about the same issues he ran on. So that's what he's betting on. But I'm eager for you to hear it in your own words. We sat down for about 30 minutes in his office. His office was kind of cavernous, and there's a bit of an echo, so I apologize for that, but you'll get used to it. But here's our interview in the weeds with Steven Reed. Well, hey, Mayor Reed, thanks for coming in the weeds.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, I know you're busy, and so just appreciate you taking the time. I was preparing for this interview. I almost didn't realize until I looked it up. This past week marked 1 year since you were elected mayor of Montgomery. That was obviously a historic moment.
Yeah.
But it looks like it's been a lot of work since then. Can you just kind of reflect on that milestone?
You know, it's been a blur. The last year really has been, and it's been a lot of work, a lot of change, but I think it's also brought a lot of promise as well. You know, I've been excited about the response of the staff here at the City of Montgomery, various departments from top to bottom, really across the board. The community has been very supportive. Business leadership has been very receptive as well. And I think there's just an overall mood, and there has been over this year, of what our possibilities can be. And so I think there's been a lot of optimism, and that's really kind of kept us going even during some of the challenges, whether that was legislatively when we first got in to be dealing with that unexpectedly, or if it was the next unexpected challenge, which has been a lot more prolonged, and that's been obviously the challenges around the coronavirus and COVID-19. So it's been one of those where we probably didn't get the full opportunity to transition like we wanted, but you know that's what this job is about. It is, I think, how do you navigate those times that you can't predict, that you don't see coming, and I think that we've done about as well as anyone in doing that over this last year. But it has been a whirlwind, that's for sure.
Well, you mentioned the pandemic, and yeah, nobody would have seen that coming. Early on, I guess it was mid-May, Montgomery was listed as a hot spot nationally, and no mayor wants that headline, of course, but we're in a better spot now. Can you take me back to that moment and what the city did, how the city worked to respond to it? Can you walk me through that?
Yeah, I think that for us, we plan for the worst and hope for the best. So, we started out, I think, ahead of the game from the first time I even heard about the coronavirus. I mean, I was leading the U.S. Conference of Mayors in January, and a friend of mine, an old college classmate who's an expert in foreign policy, and in particular in Asia and China, to be more specific, asked me was I paying attention to it. And at that time I wasn't. It wasn't on my radar. We weren't even 60 days in hardly at that point. And so I was dealing with just trying to find out where all the departments were and who was in what building and that sort of thing. And so, for us, we started to take note of it when he reached back out after we saw some of the news stories coming out of the Pacific Northwest. They were coming out of the Seattle area. And he said, you know what, this is going to spread and you need to be ahead of it. And pretty much after about that second conversation I had with him, we just got our EMA folks together, and we got our chief of staff and everybody, and we just said, just in case this thing turns out to be something kind of bad, let's start planning for it. And we started having daily meetings about it, and we went through the preparations. We stood up our emergency command center, and I think we were one of the first counties to do that. And we did that, again, just out of an abundance of caution. And I think that helped us, and that really guided us all the way through, from the very beginning of instituting a curfew to try to slow the spread to, going forward with the governor's shelter-in-place order, and then, we did the local mask mandate here. And so we decided very, very early that we were going to just really listen to the scientists and the medical experts and follow the data. And it didn't really matter, for us what the political blowback was from any side. We were just going to do what we thought was in the best interest of a heretofore seen public health 50-state catastrophe. And we wanted to make sure that we were on the right side of our decision making and being overly cautious, if anything, but not being underprepared. And so that was kind of the mindset that we had from day one, and I think that has guided us even throughout when we were listed as a hotspot to coming a couple of months after that, and having cut those cases in half after the mask mandate was instituted locally.
Do you think that headline and the news and buzz that resulted of it was almost a blessing in disguise in terms of, maybe people took it more seriously than they maybe otherwise would have?
Oh, I certainly think so, because, you hate to get to a point where it takes, bells ringing and lights flashing to get people's attention, but sometimes it does. And I think in our case, it wasn't until, national news kind of put the spotlight on us, and the medical experts locally came out and said exactly what was being said nationally. And so I think it made a difference when they saw some familiar medical faces, whether it was their doctors or whether it was people that they knew from the community or their work throughout the city, to try to change some minds. And I think that really helped us tremendously to try to turn the conversation from what was turn into a political football to what we need to do in order to get through this together. And that ultimately, while you don't want that attention for the reasons that we got it, I think ultimately it was a benefit to us. It was a net positive.
Yeah, I mean, did y'all even keep track of how many national interviews you did? I mean, that was like every other.
I didn't. I know we turned down way more than we took. That was my thing. We'll take all the local ones, and we'll only take the necessary ones on the national front.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about this upcoming property tax referendum. I know you've been out there talking about this a lot. It's high on your priority list because it means more money for local schools.
Yeah.
Can you just give me your pitch on this initiative?
Well, the pitch is very simple to me. It's essential that we invest in our public education in a way that's commensurate with what we expect. And we haven't always done that. Well, we've expected something for nothing. And that was okay for some time, but it really wasn't. It was okay in terms of it kept us afloat, but we never were able to get ahead like other communities in this state. And there's a long history behind that. Dr. Ed Bridges, who's a long time archives director, probably gave the best explanation for this when I went through Leadership Alabama about how not only the Constitution, the state Constitution was written, but how things have been funded here and why that has been such an obstacle to our growth and to our prosperity. And so when I think about education in Montgomery, I think about Montgomery being the hub and being the heartbeat of Central Alabama. And I know that for us to compete, to recruit and retain not only young families and young professionals, but for us to be able to go out and have a fighter's or puncher's chance in economic development projects, we have to have a better education system, because what we have been doing wasn't good enough then, and it sure as hell isn't good enough now. And so that's why we find ourselves losing population. That's why we find ourselves with a contracting economy, and one that has a slower GDP and economic growth statistics than any other part of this state. So we're lagging behind in large part because the regional capital of Central Alabama, which is Montgomery, it has not prospered. It has not done what Huntsville has done. It has not multiplied like Birmingham, and we have not kept up even with Mobile. And so there's a lot for us to change in terms of our mindset. There's also a lot for us to change in our approach, and that is being the low-cost leader works for Walmart. It doesn't work usually for communities who want to grow and prosper. People aren't looking for the cheapest place where they can get a product, and they are looking for the cheapest place all the time where they can do business. Again, it goes back to the old axiom, you get what you pay for. So what people are looking for in this global economy is talent. They're looking for quality, and they're looking for amenities. And for us to be able to do that, we have to have a solid foundation for our public schools. And that has no adverse effect in my mind on independent schools or anything thereof. If anything, what I believe is it's going to help everyone. And what the investment in our public schools will bring over $33 million per year to still what will be underfunded in terms of peer school districts when we think about local funding and local support. We're at about 25%. I think this will put us at somewhere around 33 or 35%, where you look at Madison, you look at Huntsville, you look at Auburn and many of those communities, Baldwin County, down in Daphne and Foley, and you see communities that are upwards of 40% from local funding. We already know, again, that the state funding is not what it should be. So a lot of this falls on the local municipalities and the local governments to support in local communities. So when you don't do that, you have a education system that's like ours, and that's one that's holding on. It's not fair to the kids. It's not fair to the teachers. It's not fair to the parents. It's not fair to the business owners. It's not fair to the homeowners here, because our property values are attached to how people view this community, and that is directly correlated to our public education system. So we want more music and arts programs, if we want an expanded curriculum, if we want more teachers and counselors and resource officers and wraparound services and support staff for these students to give them the opportunity, then it's not enough for us just to have a few pre-K classrooms if we can't educate them and keep them at grade level or ahead, K through 3 and even after the 3rd grade. We have to make sure that we're investing at a level that we would like to see that return on investment that will make all of us happy. And so that's pretty much my approach. That's probably a longer answer than you wanted, but for me, it's about all those things. But certainly, bottom line, it boils down to the kids deserve better. They deserve more than the bare minimum that this community has given to them over the last few decades and really since its inception. And it's time for Montgomery to quit living in what I would call a mediocre mindset and look to maximize the potential that we have here. We have to get out of this whole deal of just trying to get by. If we want to thrive and not just survive, as we talked about a lot during the campaign, then we have to make education a foundation of this community and a success story that we can point to as reason why people should grow their businesses here, start their businesses here, live here, retire here, and come and recruit some of our best and brightest from our schools.
It's been about 2 years since voters, the same voters that are going to vote on this, basically cleaned house at the Board of Education. I mean, they voted in almost a whole new slate. And there's been some, changes not come overnight, but there have been some, stories about accountability measures, more transparency, stuff like that. Some of that stuff's painful because you get the bad story before you get the good story on something like accountability. So my question is, do you think, I'm going back to like Amendment 1, what was that, 2003, and voters, voted it down, and one of the big reasons, besides just not wanting a property tax increase, was they didn't trust government to spend money. That was a state government thing. So I'm going back to remembering that and asking, do you think enough change has happened at the governance level and in the schools to give voters confidence to say, okay, yeah, now it's time, I'm okay paying more property taxes because the governance is better?
Yeah, I think that enough has happened to give the voters confidence that their money is going to be invested wisely. I understand the questions around accountability, and I welcome those questions. When we think about the average home in Montgomery being worth about $127,000, we're talking about the average homeowner will pay $12.75 a month. That's lunch, right? Over at Dirk's, Davis Cafe, Pierce's, wherever you want to go, that's a good lunch, all right? So when we think about that $12.75 per month and what that means over time in terms of our education system, in terms of our quality of life, in terms of the correlation to crime, as well as the type of jobs that we can recruit on the other end of that pendulum, to me, it's a no-brainer for us to invest. And let me say this, as one who could be for a Donald Siegelman-sponsored lottery, and also could be for a Bob Riley-sponsored Amendment 1, I think the failure of both of those ideas, because of the skepticism, if not the cynicism of our base, is why this state is in the position that it's in. And when you look at states like South Carolina that were smaller than Alabama in the year 2000, that had lower economic growth and lower GDP, and now we're a state like South Carolina, not North Carolina. I remember a time when we used to talk about North Carolina as being a state that we aspire to be like, well, North Carolina has left us in the dust, never to be caught. But South Carolina, in the last 20 years, has surpassed, taken the blueprint that we had to go after automotive manufacturing plants, and then built on that, but they also invested in their government, improved infrastructure, improved healthcare and education along those lines, and boom, what do you see? Job growth, population growth, cities shifting, and these job centers being created, universities booming, all of these things because of policy. And so when people think about policy, they often consider what the consequences are of those choices. And we get caught in, well, the worst is going to happen, or, the sky is falling, and because it's not perfect, I'm going to be against it. Well, if we went off of that on everything, then I'd hate to think not only where we would be as a city and as a state, but where this nation would be. Nothing is perfect. Private sector is not perfect. But yet it's still, we put in our time, we give to our we contribute to our 401ks and everything else. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but we still do it. And I think for us, for whatever reason, regardless of who's been in charge, we just haven't been able to get that level of confidence to get past it. But I think here in Montgomery, with the change in the school board, with some of the tough decisions that the superintendent had to make, and what that has revealed. It's revealed some mistakes. It has revealed certainly some misuse of funds through audits. They've been transparent. They've been very clear about what's happened, and those people have paid the consequences. Now I think we're in a place where we can say, let's not hold the kids hostage because of what the adults are doing. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can invest in our school system and also make sure that our leadership holds those administrators and those teachers accountable while still trying to go out and recruit great teachers, hold on to the good ones that we have, and make sure that we're providing the type of 21st century education that the 2030s will require.
It's interesting to hear you talk about this because, I mean, you're pretty passionate about it, and for good reason. But it strikes me as mayor, and correct me if I'm wrong, you don't actually have authority in Montgomery County Schools, right?
That's correct.
And yet you're the biggest cheerleader for this thing. I guess my question is, do you see whether this passes or fails? Should there be a greater role for the city in public schools? Do you see a city school system or a hybrid thing in the future, pass it or fail on this?
Not for me. I think that what we have to do is trust the voters and the leadership that they elected, to the school board, or the same voters that elected me to the mayor's office under the pretense of having a separation of power between our school board and our municipal government. For us, we're already underfunded municipal government. I would shudder to think what it would cost for us to take on a school system. I think that's in part why previous mayors have not done that as well. And I think that from my perspective, you don't have any authority, but you have to proceed. You have all the responsibility. Mm-hmm. It's kind of how it goes.
Yeah, most people don't realize that.
No,
especially when you're talking about it, nobody would realize. Well, it's not like he can fire the superintendent or something.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I want to see what our teachers and educators can do with adequate, I won't even say proper, but adequate resources, and what our school kids can do with adequate technology and facilities and all the things that really make a school system great, whether you're in Swanee, Georgia, or you're in South Montgomery. What does that look like? So for me, I think that what we want to do is be partners with our school system. We want to be advocates and champions for what they're doing, and then work with them in some areas that we think may be important to the business community, may be important to our military, may be important to, again, the prosperity of this city.
What does, you mentioned the military. I know you were out there earlier talking about how important it is for Maxwell Air Force Base, their future in this city, which, look, we're going to have a BRAC at some point. We need a BRAC.
Yep.
And I've worried about that personally for a while, just because, Air University, unlike other bases, I mean, you could locate that almost anywhere. It's instructional, and you can move the 908. That's Danley. And so I worry about that. Talk a little bit. I know got a little more time, but talk a little bit about why that's so important.
Well, it's important because the Air Force Base has a lot to do with the identity of Montgomery. It's a undersold asset, if you will, to people outside of, maybe to people inside Montgomery, but to those outside of Montgomery, they're well aware what Air University means. That's bringing the top leaders in our Air Force to this city and to the river region. And so, there's so many ways that we benefit from the Air Force Base being here, why it's so important. When you think about a $2.6 billion impact there's not an idea, there's not a project out there that could replicate that's on the books, or I think it's even in anyone's head right now. And so it's vital that we hang on to Maxwell and Gunner, and it's vital because it doesn't just impact the city, it impacts Ottawa County, it impacts Elmore County, even Lowndes County, and making all of our surrounding counties, Butler, Crenshaw, are impacted by Maxwell's presence. And so for us to be the leaders in Central Alabama, we have to act like it. And so for us to even be this close to where we have to discuss, could we lose it in the base realignment coming up, that's problematic for me, because that tells me we weren't doing things prior to now that have gotten us to this point. So now we're in a corner. And we're in a corner that we have to fight our way out of, and I believe we can, and I believe we will, because I think we'll pass the referendum, because people understand what's at stake. There'll always be cynics and skeptics, and I get that. But I think that for what we want to do here, we want to stabilize our relationship with the U.S. Air Force, and then we want to expand it. Because I think there's a lot of assets for us to use from state government to our universities, to the people in this community, to our location that really make us a prime place to expand the presence and not just hold on. So this to me is just kind of a first step. It is, let's get our feet on solid ground, and then let's think about how we expand this partnership, and we think about the history with the Tuskegee Airmen, being right down the road and now being located out here at Danley Field with the F-35s, but also with the opportunity through the technological partnerships we have with private industry, our universities, and state government, what we can build around this. And I think that we're in a great place. Our weather is great, 80% of the year, not more than that. And so we have some advantages that some other communities don't have. Low cost of living. We just have to make sure that we're doing things with the infrastructure of this community that keeps us ahead of the pack. And what we have to understand is the pack, other communities or other cities are always looking to poach. They're always looking at what they can do, and they aren't encumbered by some of the same baggage that we have. And so we have to be willing to shed some of that and say, hey, this is what we have to do to move forward. Doesn't matter what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but if we want to stay ahead 10 years from now, this is what we have to do. And I think that plays right into this referendum on education, and then how we continue to build on the type of community we want here for military families that are coming, and how they view us as well.
What does success look like? Let's say this thing passes. You get $33 million more for the schools. What does turning around Montgomery schools look like, and how will we know when changes are happening?
I think we'll know changes are happening when our numbers in public schools aren't declining, and we're seeing
enrollment.
The enrollment, yes, and we're seeing more people enroll their kids in our public schools, and we're able to point to that as a key success factor in landing economic development projects, as well as a key success factor in why our quality of life and quality of place is improving here for people that are born, raised, and will die in the city. And so for me, success is easy to determine, because it's through growth, it's through credibility, how are we rated, how are we graded, what can we offer, and for lack of a better term, is what's the word association? The non-scientific approach to this. What's the first word that comes to anyone's mind, whether they live here or they don't, when they hear about MPS? Now, I'm very realistic in the sense that I know money is not the panacea to all of our problems, but it is a tremendous asset to have. It is very helpful to have. It allows you to navigate things differently when you have more resources, just like any organization or any firm. And I think that for me, the success will be when we can look at kids, and we can look at teachers, we can look at parents and MPS, and we can say, you know what, we're giving them a fair shot. And we're giving them a fair shot to create opportunities for themselves and for their kids and grandkids, regardless of their zip code, and look at the opportunities that are abounding right now in the city.
You like being mayor? You having fun being mayor?
I am, man. I like it a lot. You know, I like the opportunity to kind of set the game plan, if you will, and talk to a number of people about what plays I think we ought to run, and to really advance our approach to doing things in Montgomery that puts us in line with other cities. And I think for too long we haven't been there. We've just been using an outdated playbook to continue with the sports analogy. And I think that what I like most is we're able to change it, and I think that there are a number of people who are looking forward to that change. And there are a number of people who are excited about what the possibilities can be. And with the people that we have in this community, the people that work with the city of Montgomery, all of our corporate nonprofit partners here, the best part about this is knowing that I think what we're doing is going to make their jobs not only easier, but more rewarding for them and their mission, and whatever their goals and objectives may be, and that we will be putting this city in a better place year to year, day to day than what we found at the previous time.
Thanks for your time.
Hey, I appreciate you having me. That went by fast.